Welcome to the Upshot, Multi-World Disc Golf's podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. I'm the publisher, Charlie Eisenhood, and joining me is Josh Mansfield from a new location somewhere in the world. You look like you're in a little bit of a hostage video right now. Tell us where you are.
I'm in San Antonio. We have the APTA Combined Sections meeting, which is a huge physical therapy conference every year. So I'm attending that conference on the administrator side.
So they're all in where you're doing an in-person gigantic conference.
Yeah, I had to send in my vaccine card, proof of negative test, both. So
sure.
The whole 9 yards. But the hotel lighting. I have a lamp literally right in front of my laptop, and the lighting is hopeless. So
we've been traveling around. I've been on location a couple times this month. Well, I hope you enjoy the conference, and I've never been to San Antonio.
I haven't either.
Gonna play some disc golf while you're down there?
I have my disc golf bag. Yes, I did.
Very good.
That was my carry-on.
Report back.
Okay, I will.
All right. Well, today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to kind of step away from the news cycle and talk about something that's coming up this season, which is we are about to have international disc golf back on the menu. Okay. Last year, we saw the smallest amount really possible of international disc golf. Christian Sitar, a couple of players, Albert Tom, Silver Lot, came over for a short time to play some U.S. events. Obviously, Tatar on her little mini tour was very impressive, winning a couple of Elite Series events, top 10 at the major at the World Championships, despite like horrible jet lag and everything else. And, it was just incredibly impressive. But that's really, we only got the smallest appetizer for what it could be. And now as we enter 2022, and you think about how much the sport has changed, we're about to see a major resurgence, and like more than ever before, international players playing at U.S. events. And then certainly we hope to see the large majority of the American crowd heading over to Europe for the European Open in the summertime. So Josh, just first and foremost, what are you most excited about with the reintegration of the not just European players, but players from around the world playing with the Americans?
I have two answers to this, and I think I'm going to go with the one that I haven't talked about quite as much, and that's the European Open. I love watching that tournament. I think the course is world class. It is an amazing, amazing property, and I think it's a really good opportunity because it's the Europeans' home field. It's their time zone. It's their courses. It's their home, and so it's something that I'm excited to see when the American players go over, and it's one that every American who is serious basically plays that event, and so we ensure that we have the best fields competing in both, and so I'm really excited for the European Open. I think that's my top.
Look, the last time we saw that tournament happen 3 years ago, there were 5,000 spectators, and I've never seen a tournament before or since that looked like that. It looked like a PGA Tour event. People were wrapped around the tee pads and down the fairways in a way that you just don't see. And I know we've had a big rise in spectators over here in the U.S., but it's never really felt like that. Maybe you'd say the 18th green at the Fort at Worlds last year kind of had that vibe with the bleachers, and obviously the drama that unfolded in the final round. But I still think that's been the pinnacle of what we've seen from spectating. And think about what it could be this year. Who knows what the travel situation will be, and will cross-border travel be easy? Will people be willing? If so, I think that could be a very special event. So one thing I want to do right now is just take a quick look at the first event of the year, which is the Las Vegas Challenge. And we have a very significant number of non-US based players in the field. So let's just take a quick look at who's going to be at the Las Vegas Challenge. So we'll start with the Canadians, and we'll begin MPO. Martin Hendel, Chris Zolins, Cam Zanini, and then, of course, Thomas Gilbert coming over from Canada. And then we have a bunch of European players. Hjalte Jensen, Silver Lat, Albert Tom, Seppa Payu, Blair Asgersen, Knut Holland, Oyvind Jarnes, Peter Lunds, Evald Ore, I don't know if I'm going to get that one right, Linus Carlson, and then we have one player from Asia, Jackie Chen. Yes, the man himself who popped up out of nowhere and beat a bunch of American pros, and like his first PDGA rating was in the 1040s. He is coming over to play, currently rated 1029. And he actually just posted on social media a photo of him at the airport, and he's traveling heavy, coming over for a couple of preseason events and then playing at LVC. I cannot wait to see it all unfold. We're going to get some of the best, European players, and then Jackie Chen.
Yeah, it's. Oh, first off, I'm thrilled to see Jackie Chen come over and play. I think it's so exciting. I wonder. I'd have to go back and look because he won. It was the Malaysia Open, correct?
I honestly don't remember off the top of my head the name of the tournament, but I will look it up right now. He, I believe it was the Asia Open.
Asia Open.
It was called.
So either way, in terms of the exact name, I think that what's interesting is that of all the places he's going, it's going to be at LVC, which I feel like is a course that I guess we'll see if it's conducive. I don't know how far Jackie Chen throws. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. Yeah, you're right. Is the Asia Open? Well, it's 2020.
Who could know what to expect?
Yeah.
We're all going to find out a lot in the first few weeks of the season.
Yes, we are. And what I think is interesting, and this is, I think, the hardest thing to predict, when you look just based on ratings and just compare ratings, Linus Carlson is 1035. He's right there, James Conrad, Cale LaVisca, Drew Gibson. So that's who he's rated with. He's only a couple points behind Kyle Klein, and he's ahead of the likes of Nate Sexton, James Proctor, Nico LaCastro, Garrett Gerthy. I mean, so he is well situated in rating to be a podium finisher. But then when you just look at the other Europeans at LVC, and I know there are more Europeans who are going to come over later in the year, and so this is not a comprehensive. But when you start looking at that list, I mean, it drops down to the Eric Oakley rating, the Austin Hannum, the Aaron Gossage, Brody Smith, and not to say these aren't good players, but to say that it's easy to find those players lost in the mix of the top 20 to top 40. That is still an incredibly respectable performance that shows they're an amazing disc golfer, but isn't getting the attention that that requires. I think you have to be inside top 20 if you really want to get talked about in MPO. And so it's a really interesting question to know, one, how accurate the ratings are, because you also have Connor O'Reilly in that category who came up and won a Pro Tour. Ezra Aderhol's in that area, and he's obviously demonstrated the ability to be on lead card. So ratings aren't everything. But when we have such a limited story and limited information to operate on due to the restriction of playing together, it means that it is a compelling question, and I think immediately sets the Europeans up as underdogs, which, if any of them then come to podium, becomes an exciting
right.
story. It writes itself.
Right. Well, if we remember back to 2019, Vino Makala came over and was kind of the biggest name, I think, at the time in Europe. I mean, he's currently rated 1027. No pushover. This is a good player.
Yeah.
One of the better players in Finland for sure. He came over at the start of the season and played the first two Pro Tour events, Memorial at the time and Waco. Finished 54th and 40th. It's a little bit of a lackluster start. Returned to Europe, came back later in the season and played at Worlds. That was the Peoria Worlds. He finished 20th, so that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Then had a couple top 10s at Elite Series events. Delaware on the National Tour, MVP Open on the DGPT, and then finished 33rd at USDGC. So that gives you a sense of it. At the time, let me just check what his rating was. He was 1026 rated, so pretty similar to where he is now. I do think it's fair to say that overall the level has risen in the United States, kind of across the board. But you're also seeing ratings rising in Europe. What will we see from players like Nicholas Antilla, who won the European Championship, they're in that 1030 range? Are we going to see them really line up with those numbers compared to the Americans? I mean, that's something to keep an eye on this year. And I encourage everybody to check out our series that's running right now on Ulti World Disc Golf, the European Reopen, where we're going to have a number of articles kind of just getting you geared up for what it means for the Europeans to be coming back over and playing, some information about players, where their ratings line up with American counterparts, and then we have a bunch of Q&As coming out over the next couple of weeks. But I think you're right, Josh. I mean, I think there's like the general excitement of having the Europeans back, but then there's like the actual reality that, probably only 2 or 3 of these players are going to truly be competitive at the top of the leaderboard. And how competitive, I think that still remains a question mark after 2 years away.
I think the hardest part about that as well is when you look at players who are farther down in that podium and down the leaderboard, you have players who are making a full-time profession of being on tour. But those players also have incredibly popular followings, like Eric Oakley for the longest time being an important figure at Dynamic Discs. And if you look in the 1028 range, for example, I'm just looking up at the LDC registration, you've got Jeremy Colling, you've got Andrew Marweed, Gannon Burr. I mean, those are players who are showing up but it's interesting because you have young players like Gannon Burr and Andrew Marweed who are making lead card coverage. And then you have Jeremy Colling, who isn't really making lead card coverage, but has an incredibly popular following thanks to his Jomez role, and thus has other and diversified sources of income, and is very clearly going to be sponsored because of the value that he brings to Team Innova. The difficulty then, when you look at European players, is if you fall in that high 1020s range, it feels like they have to be players that perform in order to support themselves as they come over to the United States. Because otherwise, I mean, it's difficult for American fans to be as invested. And I hope that changes with the reintegration of the tours. But I mean, I don't know of a lot of signature series discs for these players. I don't know ways that we support the European players as they're playing. Some of them don't speak English well enough to have a social media presence that can capture large swaths of the American audience. And that's not to say they can't appeal in Europe, that they're not playing influential roles in Europe, and so they're still valuable to their sponsors. But it feels like you really have to perform as a European to justify coming over to the United States, because even the cost of entry is significantly higher. And that is what I think is really difficult, is that you are in the range that it can be very much hit or miss, feast or famine, but it's also a case of do or die, that you have to step up and perform.
Yeah.
And
it's going to be hard to tour in the United States for months at a time if you're not winning money on tour.
Exactly. And they are in the position where they could be, just based on ratings, exceptional players who are in the All-Stars event, or they could be players who honestly don't feel super relevant at all anymore on the Elite Series events and when it comes to leaderboard discussions.
All right, well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Bogi Bjarnason about what's going on over in Europe, what we can expect to see from the players. We'll talk about some FPO as well. It's well established at this point that you've got tremendous talent at the top, and we will get to a little bit more coming up later in the show. Stay with us. It's the Upshot. The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. From 3D modeling to technical materials, Pound utilizes current technology to push product development beyond the current boundaries. Plus, they test multiple prototypes in the lab and in the field, and they build all their packs in the USA. Don't settle for a copycat. Get a Pound bag at pounddiscgolf.com. Joining us now on the Upshot is the manager of Team Innova Iceland, multi-world disc golf contributor, and somebody who's involved all around the world on disc golf projects and courses, Bogi Bjarnason. Bogi, welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I think you're going to be able to offer some insight into European disc golf that few have right now. I mean, I think even close followers of what's going on over in Europe have maybe found it difficult to stay up to date because of the pandemic and kind of the difficulty of keeping up with what's going on with the European scene. So I think it would be great to hear from you just a little bit first about how has disc golf played out across the continent over the last 2 years as kind of borders have been restricted and travel has been restricted over in Europe?
Well, I mean, I'm no expert, but I probably know a lot more than some of your American viewers. So, I mean, the Finns have been sticking to Finland a lot, and their tour, the Party Tours, is pretty big. And people are, traveling inside of Europe a lot. We have some players here that go to Europe when they can, but they were stuck here for like a year and a half. And I tried to go. We only managed to go abroad twice last year, just in the fall. So stuff is finally opening up back again. So going to the Spanish Open in about a week now. And one of our players, one of the Team Innova Iceland players, Blighter, is going on a full US and European tour starting at Vegas. And these players have been developing a lot, and some of them have been really like Linus Karlsson in Sweden. He was not really playing a lot, but he just shot up in rating and came out of. He was known. We knew he was good, but he just came out of kind of nowhere at the European Championships, and likewise, like Nicholas Antila is one of a lot of guys that we knew were good, but he just kind of exploded. So you never know what's going on with they'll have like 10 people that are really good, but it's just always a new name popping up.
So you talk a little bit about the development of the scene over in Europe as they're playing, and the progression during COVID as they're playing European tournaments, Finland, and especially playing just in Finland. It's clear to see, though, that there is a divide between the two scenes right now due to the travel restrictions that it seems like it's going to be lifted. When European players come over to the US and vice versa, who are some of the European players? Let's start generally. Generally speaking, how competitive do you feel the European field is going to be against the MPO side of the US tour?
Well, I mean, it's obviously hard to gauge because of the 2-year isolation. But if you look back 2 years ago, if you look back at the LVC 2 years ago, you had like on chase card, you had Oskari Wikström and or like third card and Knut Tolan. I mean, Oskari was just in his teens at that point, and he was just very unfortunate not to get on the court or even get on the podium. And and there's just, like I said, it's obviously we're mostly focusing on Finland, and there's going to be, even if there's five guys out there competing early season, there's five equally as good players that are not going to be touring because of various reasons early, and they might come over later, and like even if the guys that come early are not getting podiums, although I'm pretty sure that Antila and Linus might. There are some guys that couldn't come over later in the season and blow your mind. So you never know.
I think one of the questions that I have is, because you actually mentioned it, Linus's rating has risen a bunch, despite relative lack of competition. I wonder a little bit about how these ratings are actually lining up with the performance, because we haven't had the crossover that we typically do that allows you to maybe get more of that clear sense of the, sort of the relative scale of players. Do you feel like the ratings right now for European players, which generally rose over the last 2 years, kind of across the board amongst elite players, are those accurate? Do you think that we're going to see the players who are in the 1030s look, match their American counterparts who are rated in the 1030s?
Well, I mean, like with Linus, you that was a concern because he was rising, but from not many tournaments and not much competition. But then he shows up in Konopiste and proves that it's totally accurate. But then again, we had a guy in Germany whose name I forget, who was doing the same thing, but did not really prove himself in that same sense in the Czech Republic. So I feel that I'm no expert on ratings, but I feel like you saw people come out 2 years ago being even younger, having lower ratings, but still performing. So I think that some people, given the right conditions and as they settle into touring, their ratings are going to be pretty accurate, and some of them might even be performing above that level.
Do you think that we will see a European MPO player win a Elite Series event major, or let's call it an elite European event against American players?
An elite European event against American players. I mean, they might even win in the US. So it depends on how many players come out, and there's like the two major, like there's obviously the European Open, and then you have the Sula PCS Open. Those are the biggest ones, I think. And it's unlikely at the European Open, but at Sula, it's a definite possibility. Yeah.
On the FPO side, we have the big three, Hannah, Evelina, and Kristen, who have long established themselves. How do you feel like they have developed over the past 2 years during COVID?
Well, I mean, we've all seen what Kristen Tatar has done, so that's not even a question. So the question is, what have the Finns been doing in their relative isolation? And you saw that again. We're always using the European Championships as a benchmark, and they performed. So I think coming over, like many people have said, they might sweep the podium sometimes. It's not a far-flung idea. That might happen.
Yeah, it's an interesting in the Storylines article out today. Jesse Weiss writing that for our series on the European Reopen. He has a stat in there that the 4 top-rated women in the world, which is the 3 Europeans that we were just discussing and Paige Pierce, have actually only played against each other all together in a tournament 3 times ever. And so we're finally going to see the best players all competing together this season. where would you put the odds right now of one of those European players coming out of the year establishing themselves as the world's number one ahead of Paige Pierce?
This year, I would say maybe 40%. But I mean, it depends on how many tournaments she plays and how many tournaments they play. And but I think again, because we haven't seen the Finns enough, and Kristin just seems to get better and better. And I think that if she had made a full season last year, that could definitely have happened. So yeah, if she's present and playing well, I would say it's almost 50-50.
There were plenty of memes of Paige Pierce, sending Kristin Tattar back to Europe. Yeah. So what do you see as the players to really keep an eye on? Obviously, we understand an FPO. We have the people who finish at the top of the European Championships. Are there players who are not right at the top who you'd say, hey, make sure you watch this player because they're 16 years old and getting good fast, or because we haven't seen them play? Who are names to watch for American fans?
I mean, there's names that you already know, like Vaino Makela and Lauri Lehtinen, and then hopefully Oskari will come out later. And then there's this little, very young kid out of Estonia, Matias Levotta. But I doubt that he's going to be touring. But in a couple of years, that's a name that you should be looking out for. And then Severi Salinen and Jesse Nieminen and Obisi Blair. I have to get that one in there. And obviously Linus, but it's a given.
If you had to pick one MPO player who has the possibility of winning Worlds this year, which name are you picking?
Oh, so out of the Europeans?
Yeah, out of the Europeans.
It's so hard to say. I mean, if I had been seeing Oskari out there for the last 2 years, performing, I would want to pick him. But it's if someone is going to be doing it, it's either going to be Linus or Niklas, I would say.
Now, I understand that you have an over-under that you want to present to Josh.
Yeah, so I don't really know how over-under works, but I'm it was something about Simon versus Oskari and Niklas.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. So
I mean, I would argue that when all three are present, Simon Lesat, Oskari Wikström, and Niklas Antila, what with Simon having a baby and whatnot, I would bet that both of them would beat him most of the time.
So maybe over under 50%. So it was Wikström and Antila
yeah.
Finishing ahead of Lazat at tournaments when they're all present. Josh, it's on you.
I'm gonna take. Oh, this is so hard.
I think it's hard to project what Simon's going to be this year.
That's the tricky part. Is not only is it hard to project how the Europeans stack up against the field, but it's hard to project how Simon stacks up against the field. I'm going to take the under, mostly out of my pure desire to see Simon back to near prime Simon and staying healthy. So I'm going to take the under on this one.
So under means that he's betting on Simon.
I'm betting
That's
on
right.
Simon. Plus, he only needs to beat one of them at the tournaments. So
we'll have to see. I mean, obviously Simon has been the preeminent name. Do you think that era's over, Boye? That we're going to see after this season that there's just clearly like a new number one amongst European players. Obviously, Simon's been living in the U.S. for a long time, but I think he's still considered a European player for the most part.
I mean, he's a European,
well, right.
of course, but he's been, history of injury. He can't really throw his forehand full power. He's having a kid. He's getting a bit older, and he plays. What did he play at European Championships? So, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's not going to be the if he's playing a full tour and some of these top names are playing a full tour, I think it's quite evident that he's not going to have the best season out of those players.
Simon was the fourth highest rated player in the field. He finished seventh, 15 shots off the pace of Nicholas Untila. So as a data
so point. I mean, he's obviously a great player and has been so for a long time, but there's just so many factors that play into that.
And it's just, Father Time is undefeated. And the kids these days are so good. I mean, you just see these like 16-year-olds from Europe lacing 400-foot tunnel shots. I can't believe some of the skill that I see from the European players. I'm very excited to see if it's going to translate to the American courses. And maybe this is a question for you, Boye. How do the courses in America stack up with those in Europe? I mean, I think the beauty factor is like clearly in the European courses' favor. But in terms of skill required, difficulty of the course, length, that kind of thing, do you feel like they match up to some of the ultra long courses we've seen pop up on tour here on the Disc Golf Pro Tour?
I mean, it's hard for me to say because I don't have that skill level. But if you look at the European courses, there's none of this golf course stuff. So on average on the European tour, or what do you want to call it, it's probably going to be a bit harder because you don't have any of those courses. And if you look, I've been trying to watch some of the Finnish coverage, despite it being in Finnish. And you look sometimes at the scores, and they're in the final round, and coming into the final round, there might be like a -6, a -8. So, I mean, maybe if the courses aren't necessarily harder, maybe the par is more true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to be fascinating to see it all unfold. Are you going to be heading over to the U.S. this year?
Hopefully, but it's, everything, all my travel plans are just COVID dependent. I mean, I'm going to Spain now. I should have been going to Sao Tome in West Africa after that. And that got, canceled because of COVID. And I have a project in Nicaragua, which is hopefully happening in March. And plus, my ESTA for the U.S. got canceled because I was in Nicaragua when COVID hit and was trying to get home. And so for me now to get into the U.S. is going to be, I have to apply for a visa. I can't just go online and do it.
Essentially like a travel authorization visa type situation.
Yeah, it's going to be a much, usually you could just go online and get an ESTA and, it's $20 or so. It takes a few minutes and it's good for 2 years. But now I have to go through a whole process even to do that. So, but hopefully I'll come out. I mean, I haven't been in California for a while now, so you never know.
Well, we hope to see you out there. And thanks for stopping by and helping us get ready for this exciting season. We got, I think, about 20 players coming over the first chunk of this tour. And I'm expecting we're going to see some names up in the top 10 of the leaderboards.
Yeah, better believe.
All right. Bogi Bjarnason with us here on the Upshot. We'll be right back. Thanks, Bogi.
Thanks for having me. All right.
Welcome back to the Upshot. Great to talk with Boye about what's going on in European disc golf. I'm super excited to see, who comes out and like what the pecking order is in Europe after this year, as we'll now really get a chance to see the players battle tested against not only fellow European competitors from other countries, but of course against the North Americans. So, question for you, Josh. Do you think that one of the European women will be number one, whether that be by rating or by, just performance this season at the end of 2022? Number one in the world.
Yeah. It's so funny because when you look at the how we define this is going to be really important, because I'm pretty sure, isn't Kristen Tatar 1 on UDisc right now?
I was just going to bring it up. Kristen Tatar and Evelina Salonen are 1-2 on UDisc right now.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I do not buy that. I do not buy that. I understand that Kristen came over and certainly performed well relative to Paige Pierce. But I cannot in good conscience say that someone is number one when we are only getting a couple of tournaments. And let's remember, even though Paige did, obviously kind of give away the world championships to Katrina Allen, she still finished ahead of Kristen Tatar.
Right. Yes.
But anyway.
So I agree. I don't think that's the best measurement. Here's the answer that I will say. I don't think they'll catch Paige in ratings. I feel like at this point, Paige just continues to play maintenance, where she plays near her rating, little ups, little downs, and I mean she's just it's gonna take years to catch Paige. I am going to say one of the European women will win a Player of the Year award at the end of the season.
Okay.
How about that?
Will that be satisfactory to you as a way of saying that they are number one?
I think it's so hard to say what would be satisfactory. Right? Like, what if European women wins two European women each win 2 majors, and then Paige dominates in terms of Elite Series events, or there are lots of scenarios that I think will merit a worthwhile discussion about whether or not they contend with number one. I am willing to say that one of them will win Player of the Year for one of the Player of the Year awards, and that we will then have to have a serious conversation about whether or not they should have been they are number one in the world. So that's kind of my prediction. And maybe it's hedging my bets just a little bit, but I think it gives us an objective measure. This is what I think the European women will be able to do by the end of the season.
Got it.
All right. Also, second prediction,
yep.
There will be a European major winner in FPO this year.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so then let me give you an over-under.
Okay.
We have the bonus over-under from Boye about Simon Lizotte versus a couple of counterparts over in Europe. I got to set the right number here. 3.5, over-under. Okay. 3.5 European winners at Elite Series or majors. And I think I will include PCS Sula Open as an Elite Series. I mean, technically it's not, but it's going to be a very significant European event that will be probably pretty well attended by American players. It's also on the Silver Series. So I will, there's 2 European events included, European Open and PCS Sula. Then the Elite Series and the majors in the US. Over under 3.5 European winners, MPO and FPO combined.
Oh, I think that's a bad line, really. I'll take the over.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the MPO side is just a little bonus sprinkling of chance, but like I would have taken that line with FPO, I think.
I mean, keep in mind that the European players are not going to play all that many events.
That's true. That's true.
Just as a note. We don't know exactly what the schedules will be.
I still am confident.
Okay.
I'm confident. I'm taking
put it in the dock.
Kristen Tatar almost did that by herself.
I mean, that's true. That is true. Well, I guess we'll find out whether that's a sustainable regular thing. Maybe it is. Okay, so how about this? Notable European name, Albert Tom.
Mm-hmm.
He is playing the full U.S. Tour. The only European event on his schedule, which was just released on his social media, is the European Open. That's it. Do you think... Well, so number one, do you think this is a good idea? Is this a good move from Albert Tom? Clearly, he was motivated to come over to the U.S. in 2021 as well. You think it's a good move? And do we see other European players start to choose this? I don't think we've seen any other European players say that they're going to do something like this. Many are coming over from now to sometime between now and DDO. Mm-hmm. And then most players will go back and play the big stretch of the tour leading up to the European Open. And I am sure that we'll see players come back for the end of the season, maybe play the Northeast events, and then USDGC, Throw Pink, and who knows, maybe DGPT Championship.
Right.
But will we see other players make the full commitment to playing in the U.S.?
Unlikely. I don't think so. I don't think that you will have players. I honestly don't think that this is going to be the norm moving forward. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First, I think that European events are becoming more developed and more competitive and are becoming a just as viable outlet for competitive disc golf to develop your game. Two, I think that you're going to see increased presence of American players at European events. I mean, it's a vacation for them. They love going over there. We already see players who are going for 2 to 3 events this year, as opposed to just the European Open. And I think that, like you said, the Sula Open is going to be, PCS Sula Open is going to be very well attended. I think that's going to grow. I think it's going to become, the European stretch may very well become a 3 to 4 week swing that is a closer integration between the Disc Golf Pro Tour and others on the European side. And so I think that it's going to become even more incentivized to bring players over to Europe. And then the third thing that I think is really important in terms of the decision is I think that you can get a very clear range of Disc Golf Pro Tour events by playing the split schedule. You get the long courses, the West Coast swing out on the front half, and then you get the woods of New England in the East with all the majors and the important events on that tail end of the season. And I mean, Worlds is in August, right?
Yes, tail end of, leading into September.
So if you look at the real significance, and I'd have to look when U.S. Women's. I don't have that date up right now, but Champions Cup's in April, and then you have
that's right.
May, June, July, not till August. Then do you get Worlds? And so, if you can hit a variety of courses, all the majors, or most of the majors at least, and the Disc Golf Pro Tour Championship and European events become a connected and integrated with the Disc Golf Pro Tour, which I see as being it's already to an extent happening, but more so, I don't see a reason why Albert Tom's schedule is required to be the norm. And I think players can very successfully have the sandwich schedule and be competitive and still be just as competitive for Disc Golf Pro Tour Championships, for Player of the Year, for tour card holding, all of it at significantly less cost to themselves.
The interesting wrinkle, I agree with what you're saying, and the interesting wrinkle though is that this new European Pro Tour and the new Disc Golf stream that's going to be broadcasting European events, is there natural integration there with DGPT? If we were talking about the streaming side, I would say yes. But let's acknowledge that one of the Disc Golf Pro Tour's primary revenue streams, maybe its number one revenue stream, is Disc Golf Network.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to have another streaming service that wants to be doing its own thing in Europe that has its own sort of series of important events, including ones that are very popular historically, like Toonie, that's going to have a fat purse, Are they going to be like, yeah, DGPT, we'll let you assign points because like DGPT is going to want to come in and stream, right? They want to put it on the Disc Golf Network, and you know what? There's always a way to make it happen, right? Everyone has a number. Everyone has a number. So I don't know. I do think we're probably going to see eventually more than just a Silver Series on the European side of the Atlantic for the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Like we're going to have a fully fledged DGPT event on that side, probably as early as next year, right? So actually, what you bring up, let's put up on the screen here. Jesse Weiss, who's helping write the series, the European Reopen, put together essentially the schedule. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can check this out, but it's essentially a potential disc golf schedule for, more likely a European player to pursue. But, even a US based player. I mean, Paul Macbeth is spending basically a month in Europe. He's skipping a couple of DGPT events to go over to Europe early and play some European tournaments. But take a look at the schedule here, right? Like you said, you can play LVC to DDO, which includes the Champions Cup Major, and you get some of those nice, Texas courses, the Arkansas, Jonesboro, and then the wide open Emporia plains. And then you head back over to Europe, and you can play a bunch of the key European events, including Yarva and Nokia, Lutaguse Tuni, PCS Sula, the European Open. And then you can come back over after that stretch from essentially May to July. You get a few weeks off, and then you can come back and you play Ledgestone, Des Moines, Worlds, GMC, MVP, USDGC, DGPT. The challenge is that for FPO players, the U.S. Women's Championship falls kind of right in the middle of that European schedule, so you'd have to make a call. But the fact is, you can play more than 2/3 of all three tours: DGPT, PDGA Euro Tour, and this new European Pro Tour. By the way, both the Euro Tour and the European Pro Tour, not really that established yet. Like the bigger tours are the national tours, like Finland's Prodigy Disc Pro Tour. But you essentially, assuming that these become relevant, right, you can play a bunch of all of them and get to all the majors. And so you would still have the opportunity, if you're a great player, to qualify for the various championships. So I do think you're right, Josh. I think that European swing is going to go from being, 2 tournaments in early, middle of July to maybe being like all of July.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good thing. I think that there's a lot of opportunity, not only for players, but for the Pro Tour and the brands over in the America to go to Europe and sell the product, and get fans to come out and invest in European, in American players. And, I think it's still, you remember back a couple of years, there weren't very many American players who went to the European Open. It's a big, expensive trip.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think more players have enough sponsorship money coming in, maybe costs being covered entirely, that they're going to go over. But, for example, Missy Gannon doesn't have European Open on her tour schedule. And I think that there are going to be players who still choose to skip that because it's a long trip, because of COVID, because of whatever. And it's like, Missy's obviously somebody who could expect to finish in the top 5, but if you're somebody who regularly finishes in the 20 to 30 range, it might not be worth it financially to go over to Europe unless you want to go on vacation.
Right. Well, I think this also does 2 other really important things in terms of scheduling. One, well, I don't know if it does this, but I think it reiterates the point. Throw Pink Women's Championship should be the U.S. championship for women's disc golf.
Good point.
Like you have now taken a major, and honestly, it feels like, and I would have to look at all 3 of their schedules, but I mean, the big 3 and FPO feel a little bit screwed when it comes to, when you look at this, what the could be a potential tour, because they would have to stay in the U.S. longer than any other European player in order to make sure they can hit that major. So that's my first point. But second point, let's imagine your middle tour, month of July, tail end of August or tail end of June, early August stretch is always Europe. then what it does is it says Worlds is either in the front half of the schedule, wherever, Texas, West Coast, a little bit Midwest, right, wherever you put that there. It's in Europe if it's going to be in the middle of the summer, or it's on the East Coast, or that direction if it's going to be on that part of the tour. It creates a conducive tournament schedule to host Worlds in Europe, which I think is going to happen, and two, should happen honestly every fourth year at least.
Here's a question. If Worlds happens in Europe, which it will at some point,
sure,
should the European Open also take place as a major, or should it be replaced by the Worlds that year?
That's a really, really tricky question.
Because if you're going to have them both, realistically, you have to put them within 3 weeks of each other at max. Right?
Maybe 4, right? Maybe 4.
That's maybe weird.
Here's what I will say. It hasn't stopped the Pro Tour Championship. Right, and we've talked about it. We've talked about how it's weird to have the Pro Tour Championship after USDGC, but there's been lots of reasons as to why that's not going to change. And so I will say, one, if Worlds is going to be held at the Beast in Nokia, Finland, then you should not hold the European Open as well.
Well, at least there.
At least there. But isn't European Open always held at the Beast?
Yeah, but that's my point.
But,
like, you could put the European Open somewhere else.
That's
true.
I guess what I see as being the more likely event is the first time Worlds is in Europe, it's going to replace the European Open, and then the second time, if Worlds is held at Konopista or at Järva, for example, then in that scenario, European Open still happens at the Beast, and then you have wherever else Worlds happens. I'm fine with it. It is 2 majors very close together. And it feels a little bit odd. That's definitely true. But if we can hold the USDGC and throw pink right next to the Disc Golf Pro Tour Championship, you got to play really good for 1 month.
Here's what I think you do. Here's my pitch. Okay. I like the 4 major structure, so I don't want to see that go away for a season just because they're going to hold Worlds in Europe. So what you do is you hold Worlds in Europe. Let's do it. I think we should do it as soon as possible. And then you say, okay, instead of European Open this year, we're going to have the Japan Open, or we're going to have the, you name it.
Sure.
I don't know if we're ready yet to go to any of the like South American countries. Maybe we'll get there someday. But I think, bringing in Australia again or Japan again, in a way where it would make sense for people to get to it. And, it might not be as well attended, but I do think we need to also think about how are we expanding the horizons of disc golf beyond Nordic Europe and the United States and Canada. It's still a relatively concentrated sport. The United States is a big place and it's obviously well established here, but there's a lot of countries that don't even have a disc golf course. Yeah. And we're not going to really develop those areas effectively if we don't also think about how do we get an important tournament in that part of the world at least. And obviously there's a history of important, Japan Open. We've been to Australia within the last 6-7 years. I can't remember what exact year the Australian Open was. None of the American players went, a couple went, but that's a long trip to take for essentially one tournament.
Right.
But I also think they deserve that. There's a lot of development happening in Australia and New Zealand. Once every decade, let's have a major there.
Yeah.
So, just thinking about that, but I think you want to find a way to replace that. I do think it makes more sense to move it to Asia, say, than to have the sort of doubled up majors in Europe, which would sort of necessarily have to be close together.
Sure. Ready for the logistical answer that's even easier?
Okay, go.
Canadian Nationals becomes the major.
Why not? And that tournament has been well attended by pros. It seems like it's fantastic. Like I think is it in Newfoundland? I think they move it around, but either way, like, yes, why don't we have a Canadian major? There's so much great disc golf happening in Canada. It's beautiful there in the summertime. It would make a ton of sense to slot it in before the swing into Vermont. I mean, you're already there, right? If you put it on the east coast of Canada, the drive from Smuggler's Notch to the Canadian border is like 45 minutes, maybe less.
Yeah. So, and honestly, I don't know. It feels like there's a push for Worlds in Europe. Logistically, though, Worlds in Canada next year just makes so much sense. Like, it can be done so easily.
It does. I mean, there's gotta see a bid, you know.
the long and short of it is the world championships need to be held elsewhere in the world, and that's what we're lobbying for here.
And sooner rather than later.
Yes.
So we've got the next 2 years in the United States, this year in Emporia, next year in Vermont. 2024. Let's make it happen. All right. That is going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Looking forward to hearing from the Europeans who always love to email in and let us know who we should be following closely, who's going to be the breakout star this year. I won't be shocked if we see somebody finish in the top 10 at LVC. Just like, you know what? Let's kick off the year with a great storyline right off the top. So for Josh Mansfield, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on The Upshot.